much. So, Mr. DeGeneste, who needs no introduction,
Oh, yes.
the floor is yours, sir. And again, if you'd like, we can put this on what they call
Review.
single view, so we can all see Henry and what he's going to share with us today. So
I don't mind being in this little box.
there you go. Now you're on my big screen.
Anyhow, the reason I'm even talking today is because Colonel Black, I'm going to call him Colonel Black, he put me in a headlock at our last luncheon. And he said, Henry, boy, do I have a deal for you. And so that's why I'm here. And it's my pleasure because I really love this group. I really do. It's a good, eclectic group. A lot of good people with a lot of good thoughts looking to do good things for the Marion County and Ocala community. And so in thinking about that, you know what I said to myself? I am sure most of you, if not all of you, have seen tributes to what has happened on 9/11 between the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of these things over the years. And if you haven't, what you need to do is do another thing, especially today, since it is 20 years, but also read up on it. Because as a person that grew up in the World Trade Center, grew up in the Port Authority, I think about it every time an anniversary comes up because it troubles me. So I said to myself, you know what I want to do is talk to you about a little bit about my time in the Port Authority and the Port Authority Police, how I got there, and then talk about that day, because I was not in the Port Authority at the time. I had left actually in 1990, and I reinvented myself and I ended up working for Prudential Financial. So it was a totally different organization. But interestingly enough, I was the Senior Vice President Director of Worldwide Security for Prudential, which is, I mean, as you know, it's the oldest major insurance company in the United States. And its world headquarters, interestingly enough, is in Newark, New Jersey, where I grew up. I went to Central High School in Newark, which is right down the street from the Prudential. And most of my friends and colleagues all wanted to work at Prudential because it's an iconic company. I didn't. I went and I taught school for a while. And back in 1967, I had taken some examinations for a variety of law enforcement agencies because a lot of my friends did. Some went to law school. I was a high school math teacher. And the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Police Department called me. And I said, this is a good move, and I'll tell you why. As a high school math teacher in 1967, I was making $6,150 a year. And joining the Port Authority Police, I got a big raise to $6,800 a year. So my wife said, you better take that job because we have a couple of kids and it looks like a big raise. So, you know, that's a little inside baseball. And as I said, I joined the Port Authority Police in 1967. And I was on the streets, ironically enough, in 1968 when they had riots in Newark, New Jersey. We were backing up the Newark Police Department and also New Jersey State Police. And it was kind of sad for me to be back in the streets of my hometown trying to deal with police riots and citizens riots and the like. But I found that I really enjoyed being in police work for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to go into. But let's get now to September 11th, 20 years ago. As I said, I was working for Prudential, and I happened to be in my New York office on 199 Water Street. Prudential had 5 buildings in Lower Manhattan below Canal Street, those of you who may know New York, but not far from the World Trade Center. In fact, the building I was in was 199 Water Street. We called it Seaport Plaza, and I was on the 26th floor. That's where my office was. And it looked out over the East River, where I could see the Manhattan Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and all the East River bridges. And I happened to have just ended a conference meeting with my senior staff. And my executive assistant comes running into my office and said to me, "Did you see on the TV out here that a plane just hit the World Trade Center?" And my first reaction, because it was such a clear day, well, it must have been somebody's private plane that went off course and hit the World Trade Center. And I turned on the TV then in my office, and quickly thereafter, guess what? I saw that it was another plane hitting the World Trade Center, and that was a commercial jet. And at that time, I said, we need to do some things because we're pretty close also to the World Trade Center, and who knows what's going on. And I went down into our lobby and I activated our crisis management team that we had both in New York and also at the world headquarters in Newark. And my staff did what they needed to do to keep people calm because there was already panic in the streets. And what I did at the time, I decided to run down to our other major building, which was down at the foot of Manhattan, right at the Staten Island ferry dock. And that building was called One New York Plaza. And the reason I ran down there was because that's where all of our computers were, our mainframe, and our trading floors, because that's where all of our trades went through for the NASDAQ, for the New York Stock Exchange, the American Exchange, and that's where we did it. So my concern was, if power went out, could we sustain ourselves? But halfway down, when that second plane hit, it sounded like a bomb had gone off. And I was just a block away from the New York Stock Exchange. And what I thought was a bomb had exploded at the New York Stock Exchange. And all of this concrete dust, as you've seen on TV, was flying through the air. And I got covered in concrete. It was like snow, but I could feel the concrete pebbles hitting me. And so I said, well, I better make a U-turn and go back to my main building to see what's going on up there. So I made a U-turn, and it was just 2 blocks going north again. And by the time I was able to get 2 blocks north, people were running up north from other buildings, actually stampeding over people. People were screaming, people were stampeding over each other. It was like herds of cattle, you wouldn't believe it. And we were only 4 blocks actually east of the World Trade Center. And when I get to my lobby, people were screaming in the lobby, what should we do? What should we do? We had a public address system, and we told everybody, stay in the buildings. Because as people were running up, and this is called Water Street, people were breaking their legs, breaking their arms, and trampling over people. Because many people were trying to get to the Brooklyn Bridge, the East River bridges, to try and run toward Brooklyn to get out of Lower Manhattan. I was able to, because of my background in the Port Authority and in the police department, and I was the superintendent of police for almost 8 years, I called some people that I knew in Washington at both the FBI, Secret Service, and NSA. And when I was on the phone, which is interesting, and this is before things settled at the Pentagon, they thought another plane was heading to Union Station in Washington, D.C. And so I couldn't stay on the phone very long. They said, just do whatever you can to get your people to safety, because we don't know how many planes may be hijacked throughout the East Coast. And they said, you need to be careful about the Brooklyn Bridge and the East River Bridge, and obviously the iconic George Washington Bridge. Those of you who don't know, the George Washington Bridge then and now have more trucks and cars going over in one day than any other bridge in the United States. And so that was a major concern. Anyhow, what I did was we were able then, by the afternoon, a few people outside of our doors were injured. We were able to pull them into our building, and we had a nursing staff and a doctor in our building, and they tried to take care of them, but there was no way to get them to any local hospitals. Because what had happened was, because people were injured at the World Trade Center, all the hospitals in that part of Manhattan were dealing with people that were almost near death, and they were running out of blood. So that was a major issue. I'm going to fast forward now toward the afternoon, because there were no subway systems or anything like that that were running. So what we had to do was talk to people in our 5 buildings and say, because we had an intercom system that went to all the buildings, to stay put, and we will give you directions of how you can get north above Canal Street. Canal Street was the demarcation line, and that's where the National Guard was stopping people from coming in to the World Trade Center area and Lower Manhattan. But also they were telling people there were no subway systems working below Canal Street. So if you had to leave Manhattan, you either had to go across the Brooklyn Bridge, the East River bridges, the Manhattan bridges, and walk across and get to Brooklyn, or walk up north, and then subways up there were running. And you have no idea. It's hard for me to articulate the panic that took place. But just think of herds of cattle running and just trampling people. They don't talk about that, but it was such a traumatic day, and a day that the people that were down in Lower Manhattan, I can see why they will never forget. Not just the people over at the World Trade Center, because the clouds that took place with the concrete that was blowing, because all of a sudden it was blowing all over Lower Manhattan. And here's one of the things that we heard people screaming that were coming from the World Trade Center. And I think there have been some films about this, but they may not show it. People actually jumping out of the World Trade Center to their death because they were so afraid to run down the steps, because they knew they were running into fire. So what happened was people just stopped and jumped out of windows. People from the 60th to 70th floors just jumped to their own death, to show you what panic there was in Lower Manhattan. Excuse me. Anyhow, so you need to be able to visualize what panic was all about. It was like a war zone where bombs were being dropped and people were just running. Anyhow, by that afternoon, we were able to get rid of most of our staff. But what was happening was this. What happened was this. Because we were able to get most people out, it was lucky for us and many people in Lower Manhattan. The power at the Con Edison major area for Lower Manhattan all went out. People don't talk about that much, but it all went out about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that meant that no buildings below Canal Street from the east side to the west side had any power, none. So it was pitch black. So can you imagine, after the panic during the day, pitch black, and people were still trying to get out of Lower Manhattan. Luckily, Prudential, that building I told you that was at the Lower Manhattan, that was at the ferry slip, because of our world headquarters in Newark, we were on a different grid. We were not on the Con Edge New York grid. We were on the PSC&G New Jersey grid. and we never lost power in that building. So consequently, and we don't talk about this that much either, we maintained our power. So what we could do, we couldn't do it immediately, but we could still do trades for financial systems that the exchange couldn't do, the New York Exchange, the NASDAQ, none of them could do it because all their power was out. And so what happened was 3 or 4 days later, when the CEO of Prudential in Newark found that out, he gathered up all the CEOs of all the major financial firms, and they all went up, I remember this, to the Waldorf. I came up, and they made a deal that Prudential would do all the trades for all the financial firms, including the New York Stock Exchange, because we couldn't do any of that for 3 days. And the financial systems in the United States were starting to really tank because we control the world finances. We really do. Now, here's something that's not talked about, and it may come out in this report that the president is letting out, because if you recall, there's been controversy about releasing all the reports that were developed after the 9/11 Commission. Most people don't know this, but I think they're going to conclude in this report that one of the major reasons the World Trade Center was hit by these terrorists was not because they talk about it's an iconic building and it represents capitalism and so on and so forth. What it really represents in many people's eyes is capitalism at its peak, because what people don't know, the amount of banks and financial firms that were there in that place, okay? What was there was close to 190 financial firms. All the banks that you can think of, all the world banks in New York had offices right there. All the trading companies had offices there. All the insurance companies had offices within the World Trade Center. That's one of the reasons the World Trade Center was built, to consolidate all of those financial companies in 2 major buildings in the center of Lower Manhattan. So because of that, that was a reason that many people believe the World Trade Center was hit, to shut down our ability to trade dollars, trade gold, to trade anything financial in the United States of America. And it's been said that if we couldn't do that for a week even, the markets would have really tanked and put us in a bad way to go. So that's one of my feelings too about what happened. One of the things too that was very interesting was how the National Guard, people don't talk about the National Guard very often. I talk about police and fire and all of those people, but the National Guard really were able to stand up and really, really protect people in Lower Manhattan, because it was panic there, not just the first day, the second day, the third day, for almost a week, because a lot of people were afraid to leave down there and go home because they really wanted to help people that were at the World Trade Center. Those of you who probably don't know, the numbers of New York City firefighters that were lost just in that day was over 343 New York City firefighters died just that day trying to rescue people. In my police department, we lost 37 police officers. And unfortunately, because I spent all those years in the police department, I knew every one of them that died, every single one. And that still troubles me. And what troubles me even more, and New York City police officers, 23 were killed that day. And of just EMS people coming down in ambulances, 10 were killed. But what troubles me and what's ironic is The person that replaced me as superintendent of police in the Port Authority, he ran in to save people's lives and he died that day. And my wife always says, guess what? That could have been you if you had stayed there a little bit longer. But another piece of irony is this. I was scheduled to have lunch that day at 1:30 in the afternoon at Windows on the World, which was the iconic restaurant that was up on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. So if those planes had crashed that afternoon, I wouldn't be here to talk to you. So life is very interesting. But I just want to give you also some statistics, because people too don't talk about these things and how iconic and what a symbol the World Trade Center was. The World Trade Center was finished in 1970, the Twin Towers. I was a cop, I guess, 4 or 5 years in the department at the time, and I saw it when it opened up. But people don't realize on any given day, about 50,000 people worked there. Put your mind around that, 50,000 people. But you know how many people visited there on a given day? Almost 150,000 on a given day. That's how many people were in the building. So when you think of the loss of life, a little over 3,000 people, guess what? Just think of what it really could have been if the devastation and if people were not running in to save people, because the people that ran in to save people knew how to get them out. They got them out through fire, they got them out through explosions, and it was very sad that so many people did jump out of the building. It's estimated that over 60 people jumped out of the buildings to their death without being concerned about maybe we could be saved by the firefighters, the police officers, and so on and so on. So that's what panic does. That's what it really does. It's a shame. There's another thing too. People don't also know that within the building, the Secret Service had offices. And you know why they had offices there? Because the presidential limousines were in the 5th basement, his armored vehicles. Whenever the president of the United States came into New York, the Secret Service would take his limousines from the World Trade Center, and that's what he would ride around New York in. People don't know that. And the CIA had offices in there, the FBI, US Customs. Most of the government offices in the federal government were also in the World Trade Center. The governor of the state of New York had offices there. The governor in New Jersey had offices there. And why is that? Because the Port Authority is a bi-state agency. Both New York and New Jersey control the Port Authority. So there's a lot of government offices there too. So all of those things really stopped when the World Trade Center was hit. One of the things that amazed me too, and it still amazes me, the new World Trade Center that was built was actually opened up in 2014. That's amazing. If you ever take a video and take a look at the place, you would be amazed at how they could build that building so rapidly. Now, it doesn't look like the old World Trade Center, very different, but it's still one of the tallest buildings in the world. It's 94 stories high and it's beautiful. I've been there a few times, but it makes you proud too. And there's a place they call the Oculus, which is where the Port Authority trains come into from New Jersey. And they made it into a museum where you can see a lot of artifacts from the remains of the World Trade Center. One other thing that's not talked about, and it's not talked about enough, and it's one of these things that really disturbs me, and it's the residual effect that staying at the site, some people have stayed at the site for a month, 2 months, still trying to get bodies out, trying to get things out of the World Trade Center to save lives. But remember, The people that were digging and trying to save lives were up to their waist sometimes in jet fuel. And if you know the corrosive effect of jet fuel, you can get all kinds of residual illnesses. And as I said, 37 police officers that I know of in Port Authority died that day. But I know over 150 police officers have died of cancer, emphysema, COPD, all kinds of illnesses as a result. They've had studies up at NYU and at Sloan Kettering hospitals that have been tracing everybody. Those 343 New York City firefighters, double that number, have died since then because of respiratory illnesses and cancer-related illnesses because they were there so long. And the same goes for New York City firefighters and for EMS people. So we don't talk about that enough. The residual effect has been tremendous on those families and on those people. I hope we've learned at least that these kinds of things gave us a wake-up call. And now I'm going to get a little political. A wake-up call that we really need to be able, because during that time, the United States was very, very myopic and never believed anything like that could happen, I don't think, to us, because we really never had any major terrorist incidents in the United States, especially foreign terrorists in the United States up to that time. We had a bombing in 1993 at the World Trade Center where some guys went under one of the parking lots, rented a van and blew it up, but it didn't do that much damage. And they were caught by our detectives, I think 3 days later, but it really wasn't much. And they were really amateurs. They weren't organized like the 19 skyjackers. And if you looked around the United States of America, we really didn't have that many international terrorists. What we did, and we kept our eye off the ball, and we're still keeping our eye off the ball, are domestic terrorists. Domestic terrorism has been a problem since I've been in police work back in the 60s, but we never really look at it. And I think we're finally having a wake-up call. The good thing that happened after 9/11 was we had the 9/11 Commission, and it identified things that we really never focused in on. And remember, if you flew a plane before 9/11, a lot has changed when you get on a plane today and you go through an airport. Remember sky marshals and all that stuff. That was the initial. And now you're screened and there's all kinds of things. And just things like Border Patrol and border security and all of those things have changed. The way, we never had a Department of Homeland Security before. And now it is the umbrella agency that does all of these things. And one of the things that we really didn't have good intelligence in the United States in those days. Most people forget that there was a female FBI agent out in the Midwest that had put together a dossier on this may be happening. But two reasons: because she was a female FBI agent, the people in Washington didn't pay much attention to her. And I've heard this from a lot of people. And when they connected the dots later on, people said, oh, we should have listened to her, because she didn't necessarily predict it, but she did have a lot of information that if everybody else connected the dots in Washington, D.C., they may have been able at least to thwart this event. So a lot of good things have happened since then. But again, one of the things we need to do is remember, we are not immune. We are certainly not immune. We used to think that because we had the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, we were safe. Absolutely not. And we're not safe now because of domestic terrorism that has risen its head. But the good thing is the Department of Homeland Security is looking at it very, very specifically along with the FBI, along with Secret Service, and along with the military. And we're finally waking up. And one of the things too, and I'm going to put on my old police hat, and given these last couple of years and a lot of rhetoric around about defunding the police, disarming the police, reducing police budgets, and so on and so forth. And I was speaking to a lady who just got a new job as chief up in Vermont, who used to work for me. And she said, that this is a small city. And she said that they've been talking to her about defunding the police. And she said to a woman who was telling her that, she said, well, what are you going to do if somebody breaks into your house and puts a gun to your head, and now you call 911? There's not enough police officers to respond because you cut the budget so thin. And so the lady said, well, I hear what you're saying. We can't have knee-jerk reactions to these things. The police need to be changed. The police need to be more accountable to the citizens that they're supposed to protect. And we need to get away from this warrior mentality about police. But when you think of all the police that just responded to 9/11 and risked their lives to save people that they didn't know, most police officers really want to do the right thing. And so we can't lose sight of that. We certainly can't. Again, I'm going to get back to domestic terrorism. Besides 9/11, the largest domestic terrorist act, do we remember Timothy McVeigh? And when he set that bomb and blew up all those people plus kids that were in a daycare center? That was the largest domestic terrorist incident that we had in the United States. And we never really followed through and investigated domestic terrorism. Okay, we've had a lot of suicide bombers here in the United States that, we do a file because the bomber killed himself, then we don't do anything. Mass shootings. Mass shootings are domestic terrorism. And we don't deal with that except to say, well, the First Amendment allows people to buy as many guns as they want. And again, it's a fact of life, but we need to deal with it. And I think we're much more sensitive to this, and it's here to stay. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of things I wrote down. If we learn nothing else from this incident and tragedy, we should learn that life can be very, very short. And so there's no time, and Bridges epitomized this, there's no time for hate. There's no time for hate. And a president said this next thing: even the smallest act of service, the simplest acts of kindness, is a way to honor those that we lost on 9/11. But it's also a way to reclaim that spirit of unity that it looks like we lost since 9/11. Remember that. We are splitting apart as a nation. We're coming together today to honor those people that were together, and the nation was together. But the further we seem to get away from 9/11 as a nation, we're splitting further and further apart. And all of us in Bridges understand that, but we need to go out as what should I say, as shepherds, and we need to bring the flock together. Thank you. No, we don't need any claps. Anybody has any questions? I'm here to take questions.
Yeah. Henry?
Yes.
I remember when Jon Stewart was in the news trying to fight for support for the survivors of 9/11 who had serious illnesses. And I don't know what came of that, if they did come up with the support that was needed.
Yes, John was a great advocate. And sometimes it's good to have somebody that's a celebrity. And he was indefatigable. He really kept it up. And they finally got Congress to extend what they had, and they extended it for another 25 years. So they will not have to foot the bill and so on and so forth. And so he was really a good advocate, and he made it work. He put Congress on notice and put their feet to the fire. So we really have to give some kudos to John for sticking with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. I know I went over my 15 minutes.
Okay, you're fine. Other questions, comments? Delphine? You're still on mute, Delphine.
Delphine, you're on mute.
Okay. Henry, that was remarkable. There was much new information in this. And I hope the recording will be posted on our Bridges site, giving the number of minutes so that people can set that time apart.
Yeah.
Because a lot of my difficulty with a lot of these messages, people, they just expect you to take off 2 hours without informing you in advance. So there, Henry, I am so thankful for your realism, because so much of what we are listening, even this morning, Andy Card transforming George Bush into something that he is not. So the fact you were talking about the people who were not all angels as they tried to survive, this is important. This is important also. Thank you so much, Henry.
Thank you, Delphine. Thank you, Gorham.
Well, I know to Delphine's point, this morning was our memorial at Veterans Park beginning at 8:30 this morning. And because again, there is a whole week-long series of events with a traveling memorial wall.
Yeah.
But again, the dignitaries spoke, and the fire chaplain spoke very eloquently. There was a wonderful woman there who grew up here in Ocala, as did her husband, started his career here with South Trust Bank many, many years ago. And then as his financial career progressed, they moved to Atlanta. And then from Atlanta, he got a position in New York, and eventually was with KBD in the South Tower on the 89th floor. And her dear husband lost his life when that tower collapsed. And she told a most poignant story this morning, which was incredibly moving. And again, two of the partners, two women, actually did survive and make it out. They evacuated in an express elevator, and the elevator started a free fall. And finally the emergency brakes engaged, and they were between the second and first floor, and tried to get the doors open. Finally got the doors open a little bit. Someone got out, went and got firemen. Firemen came back in, got more people out, but her husband stayed behind to help with the rescue efforts. And unfortunately, the tower collapsed before he was able to get out. So he lost his life.
So many.
And again, other stories of just heroism, because saving other people. And that was incredibly well done. And, they had all of the images and the songs and whatnot. Regretfully, though, one of our representatives was asked to speak, and it was Representative Keith Perry. And I don't know if his remarks will ever be captured or recorded, but totally, in my humble opinion, absolutely, totally inappropriate for this time. He started speaking about the generals in our military today that are trying to talk about inclusion and equity. And he bemoaned the fact that they're talking about white privilege instead of executing a plan to assure that terrorism doesn't happen again, and belittled the current administration for that same reason. And it was all of this anti discussion. He referenced a textbook that is being used he didn't say the word, but at liberal universities that are bemoaning our covenant, our Christian covenant. And there was no place for that message today. And so, you know, to everyone's point, to Delphine's point, to Henry's point, this continues, this separation, this not coming together. And that's why I so appreciated Henry's remarks about we need to come together. We need to figure out a way to talk to each other, but this continued polarization is not helping us. And I had people that looked at me and I looked at them and we're going, oh, this is just awful. So again, Henry.
Barbara, let me ask a question if I could, please.
Mhm.
Who was that spoke this morning down there?
Representative Keith Perry.
Well, I mean, you know, see, that's the kind of thing in my
Or
humble
senator,
opinion.
I'm sorry, he's a senator, Florida
Yeah,
State.
he's a state
Florida
senator that whatchamajigger works for. Suzanne.
Correct.
Is his running buddy.
Correct.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of thing that I thought we had bridges for. Now, if that's what that gentleman said, he, of course, is a right-wing Republican. He's a Trumpite. And I don't have anything wrong with all that kind of stuff, but you don't go out and on a day
like today,
sacrilege as this is and do that kind of stuff. And we as Bridgers should make him hear the fact that we didn't appreciate that kind of rhetoric. And that's what all of these right-wing, and Henry, these are the white supremacists that are today's terrorists. And this is what they're doing.
And let me say this, Bob. For him to say what he said, see, people don't even focus in on this. There were over 120 countries, citizens of 120 countries that died that day at the World Trade Center. Immigrants, okay, to the United States of America, you know, that we love to hate. In fact, over 60 of them came from the UK. And I mean, we love to hate the immigrants, according to this guy, who I don't even know. I've seen his name, but that's the kind of rhetoric that really promotes all of this hate. You see, I mean, because we know what happened with new immigration laws just in 2020 and in 2019. So that's part of the problem. You see, we're becoming more and more divided, as I said, and there's no unity here in this country. You know, we'll come together for today and tomorrow, when people are in their respective churches, I'll put it in quotes, okay? And then they'll separate themselves again. And that's the tragedy. And that's why we're going down this rabbit hole as a nation. And if we don't wake up and really understand that we are not the beacon for freedom that we thought we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, we're going to have a lot of hell to pay, I think, in the next decade or so. I won't be around. Gorham won't be around. Delphine won't be around, right, Delphine? Well, you may be, but but anyhow, I mean, you know what I mean? And that's the frustration that I feel when, like you, Barbara, you go to an event, you hear somebody with all of this crap saying certain things. And let me tell you, if I wasn't being recorded now, I would tell you, everybody here, some things that I personally know about 9/11 and our former president. Okay, but I can't talk about it on record because I know I'd get assassinated. Anyhow, thank you.
But again, the overwhelming positive and the remembrances and the appropriateness of all of those remembrances are the ones that are abiding today. And Henry's wonderful comments, which will make sure, Delphine, to your question, will get posted. The entire thing has to be posted, but we'll excerpt that his remarks begin at this point in time in the recorded meeting, and we'll get that out there, and may even get it out there if we can as a special piece that goes out soon, early next week. So we'll work on that. We'll work on that. So, all righty.
I have a question.
Yes,
Excuse
ma'am.
me, I'm out here running, but so I look terrible. But Henry, is there an easy place to find the statistics about the demographics of the people that the first responders who died that day, in terms of where they were born, nationality, how many Muslims, how many Jews, how many, is there, because I think that's, I'd kind of like to post that these were not a homogeneous group.
Yeah, I tell you, I'll call my friends in the Port Authority, okay, because the Port Authority Police, I am sure, has all of those things. In fact, there's one young man, Will Germano, who I promoted, I think, to detective, and he was buried for almost 2 days. And he's Latina. And there's another fellow who was Asian, I think he's was Korean, and he saved several people with his canine. And so, yes, I am sure I can find it out. And if I get it for you, I will make sure that you get it and you can do whatever you need with it. And you can show, see, and you can demonstrate that this was a very, very eclectic group of people from all walks of life, women, men, and other ethnic groups. And that says something too to people like this guy who sounds like a knucklehead.
Right. So many people of so many backgrounds who love this country and love their fellow human beings enough to give their lives. I would like, thank you, Henry. I appreciate it.
Mhm. All right. Any other comments or questions for the good of the order this morning? And yes, we're still this morning.
It's only 11:20 something.
I know, it's all exactly. So, all right. We thank you all for being with us today. Henry, special thanks to you for sharing that wonderful memory. And to all of you, may you have a very blessed rest of this day, as we do remember, as we do acknowledge. So again, blessings to all, and we will reconvene soon. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.